Hey guys, it's Sam for Digital Meat again, and in this tutorial I want to take a look at a plugin. And it's called Flock Modifier. So let's get stuck in. First of all, you're going to want to download it, and it's from this guy's site. Frank, well, he's obviously German because of the .de. I think his name is Frank Villek or something along those lines. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. Anyway, so if you go to his site, I'll put the link in the description. Go to download C4D plugins, and there you go, Flock Modifier. And this does work with R18 now, so that's all good. So you download it from there, you get a zip file, unzip that, and then we just go to C, Program Files, Maxon, C4D 18, plugins, and then you whack it in there. There you go, Flock Modifier. And once you've done that and restarted C4D in your plugins, you should have Flock Modifier. So I suppose we better take a look at the plugin. Okay, so first thing to note, it works with standard C4D particles. So if we go up to simulate, I think it is, particles, and get ourselves an emitter. There we go, we've got a lovely emitter there. So I'm just going to resize this. Let's make it a little bit wider in the X. And now we're going to need something to emit. So what we're going to do first is get ourselves a simple shape, because I don't really want to spend too long on building something. So let's resize this so it's a shape a little bit more. Yeah, that'll do. Something like that. That'll do us, and then I'm going to resize the whole thing so it's not so massive. Something like that. We also want to make sure that it's pointing and traveling in our Z direction. So, like that. Okay, and now we can whack the pyramid in our emitter. Choose the emitter. And let's have a look at some of the emitters settings. So the birth rate in the editor is 10, and in the renderer, first of all, we want to hit show objects. So if you hit that and then press play, our objects will be visible coming out the emitter. If that's not ticked, it will just show the particles coming out. So we want to show the objects, and I think we're going to up our birth rate. So let's crank our birth rate in the editor to something like 100. And in the renderer, so they both match. Our lifetime is 20 seconds. Let's put 30 seconds on the clock for our timeline, and we're going to make our lifetime 30 seconds as well. So they last the entire span of our timeline. Okay, so start emission and stop emission. I'm going to just have it emit for maybe 1 second. So there we go. And then I think I'm going to up the birth rate as well to 150. Just so we get a blast of particles coming out. I might even go higher than that. Let's go 200. There we go. So we get a load of particles coming out. And I think that's fine. That's our setup. Okay, so now onto the plugin. So let's go to the plugins, go to Flock Modifier, and then choose Flock. And let's see what happens. Not a lot. I mean, it is being affected. But you can see that they're kind of stopping. Okay, so that's something that we don't want. So if we go to our Flock modifier, go to the object tag, we've got this wait, so that basically says what let's just crank this time down a little bit so it can loop. Here we go. Okay, so So this is the effect of the modifier itself. So if I bring the weight down to 0 and then restart, you can still see it's having some kind of effect, which is strange. Maybe if I turn that off, okay. Okay, so it is actually having an effect, which is very strange. But yeah, this is the weight of the effect. So if you want flocking, you leave that 100%. So let's go onto the flocking tab. Here's where the sort of action takes place, really. Okay, so first of all, we've got the neighbour range. Now, what this does is it pretty much looks at each one of these objects. In flocking, it's called a void. So this neighbour range, what it does is it's the range of sight for each void. So it will look to see its neighbour, and this is the range in which it can see its neighbour, and then consider it in its calculation. So that's 50 centimetres. So if we take a cube and make this 50 by 50, that is the range in which each void can see its neighbour. And obviously, as soon as it gets further than that away, this is probably why we're getting this stopping here. So we need to crank that up. So if we go back into flocking and make our range, say 100, double that. There we go. We're getting a bit more. We're still getting some left behind. So let's make that even bigger. Let's make it 200. Okay, so they're flocking together. That one got left behind a little bit more. I'm just going to crank this up. I want them to be able to see each other from quite a distance away, so I'm going to make that 1,000. And there we go. Okay, so now we're getting some flocking behaviour. Okay, the centre flock. This is the next thing on our list. A void, so one of these objects, a void, will try and stay in the centre of the flock. So it will look at the sort of average of its neighbours and all of that stuff, and then try and move to the centre of the flock of objects. So that's why you can see them all sort of bunched up together at the beginning there. Actually, I'm going to keep a box in my scene just for reference later. Okay. Now, that can be a little bit extreme. So if I knock this down, we can see that they're not really bothered about staying central to the flock. They start to spread out. Let's put some more time on our clock. Not 5 seconds. Let's make it 10. Okay. So they start to spread out, and they just sort of keep going. So they're not really flocking together now. They're kind of just sort of spreading out. I think the weight was on about 20% here. So look, yeah, it was 20. I think that's a little bit too much, maybe. So I'm going to knock it down to 10 and then restart. Okay, so they do flock together. Might even knock that down a little bit more. Okay, so they're still trying to sort of stay together, but it's not as strong as it was. Okay, I'm going to leave it at 5% for now. We can always come back and tweak that. That's fine. Okay, so the next setting is neighbour minimum distance. So this is so a void will avoid colliding with other voids. It will try to keep a minimum distance to its neighbours. So what it will do is it will look at its neighbours within the range of sight, which we set earlier, the neighbour range, and measure the distance to each of them. And if a neighbour is nearer than the minimum distance, the void will attempt to get away from it. So you can see that it's at 10% at the moment. It's 10% at 10 centimetres. So if it's within this distance, it will try and get away from the void. Let's crank this up to 100 and see what happens. You can see they spread out because they're trying to get away from their neighbours. This might be a lot better if we had a lot more. So you can see they're trying to flock together again, but to avoid collisions, they're respecting this minimum distance. Now, if we go back to what it was initially, which is 10, you can see that the weight of it is only at 10%. But if I whack this weight up, they will try a lot harder to stay away. So let's just crank this up in increments. Let's go 20. Okay, so now they're trying to keep away from each other at 20. Let's try 30. Okay, so now there we go. So I'm going to set this to 50 and see what result we get. Yep, they're really spreading out now. Okay, so I think 25 may be a good distance. Yeah, okay, they're coming out and they're flocking now. Brilliant. Also, I might crank up the amount of the birth rate actually to 300 maybe. And see if we get a little more. There we go. Yeah, so that seems to be quite good. The next setting is match flock velocity. So a Boyd will attempt, it will try and adapt its average travel direction and speed of its neighbours within the range of sight. So it will look with the distance of this neighbour range and then make a decision on what the rest of the Boyds around it are doing. So it'll just try and match speed and direction of its neighbours pretty much within this range. Excuse me. So it kind of makes the Boyd blend in with its crowd a little bit more. So if and this weight is obviously how much the Boyd wants to follow this rule kind of thing. So if I crank this up, you can see that it's a lot more uniform now. The Boyds want to stick with their neighbours. That's 100%. And this is at 0%. So if we crank it up to 50, you should get like a blend between the two, really. But again, it's a lot more uniform. So maybe if we just crank it down a little bit, maybe 15%. So it kind of, okay. There we go. Something else to notice as well, if we go to the emitter and you've got this tangential button, if I click this on, then they actually point in the direction they're moving. So you can see that this is a lot more like a, kind of like a school of fish really, or something like that. But you probably want this on because if you don't, you can see that they're moving down and up, but they're all pointing in the same direction. So really you would want them pointing in the direction of travel like this. Looks a lot more natural. So let's go back to the flock. So match flock velocity. If I whack that up now, you can still see they've got a slight turn on them, but very much more uniform. So I'm going to leave that at 15%. You can see they kind of stick together, very much like a school of fish. If you whack it down, it's a lot more like a murmuration in birds. A lot more random, but I'm going to leave a little bit of weight on that. Okay, so the next one is level flight. A Boyd will avoid sort of sinking and raising in like steep swoops, if you like, and attempt to sort of fly level. So they're not really doing that at the moment, to be honest. But let's see if we can get a bit of difference if we crank this up to 100%. Yeah, you can see they're not really turning up and down now. Very uniform flight path. Very uniform. And again, if I whack that down, we can see that there's some variation in their flight up and down. In fact, I prefer that look for what I want to be going for. I've just knocked this down to the match flock velocity down to 10% as well. Yeah, okay, that's good. The next thing that we've got is the turbulence. So the turbulence will just sort of add randomness to make it look more natural. So I think basically what's happening, the noise field is being applied to the flock, and they'll turn in random directions. At the moment it's on 50%. So the weight controls how rapidly the pattern of the variation changes. The frequency is determines how rapidly the pattern sorry, the weight controls how much a Boyd wants to follow the rule. The frequency is how rapidly the pattern of variation changes, and the scale defines how small or large the pattern of variation is. So let's tweak some of these settings. If I turn down the turbulence, it's very smooth. If I wake it up a little bit more turbulence, and obviously if we go to 100%, yep, that looks a lot more turbulent to me. So I think a nice smooth result is about halfway. And with the frequency, it's set at 2 at the moment. Let's crank it right up. Let's crank it right up to something enormous. Okay, that didn't actually have too much effect. So let's bring it back down to 2. Let's grab the scale and crank that right up. Okay, so the scale, obviously you can see the variation scale is massive now. So you'll see that it'll deviate up and down a lot further than it would have normally. Let's bring the frequency down and see if that has an effect. In fact, let's bring the frequency down to 0. See what that does. Okay. Okay, so the scale, if I make it a lot smaller, yes, its scale is obviously very small, and if we were to crank this up to we'll see a lot more variation. Large patterns, look, you can see that swooping right down. So it's just the scale of the noise, really, that controls the turbulence. Okay, so now we covered how you set up the flock. How would you control it? Well, we've got a few options here. If we go into the flock and then go to the control tab, we can see we've got some controls in here. So let's go through these. Speed limits, the weight. So it controls how much a Boyd wants to follow the rule. This weight will only have an effect on... Okay, you can see that now I've cranked it up. That would be good for simulating fish in water, maybe. But it basically sort of... that's the weight of these speed limits, which I'll go on to. This weight will only work if it's set to soft. If it's set to hard, you can see the weight gets greyed out there. So let's set that back to soft and bring the weight down to whatever it was. Oh, it was 0, I think. Okay, so let's crank this weight up. What happens if I do it down? Start again. There we go. So we're back to normal. Crank this up by, let's say, 50. Okay, so the speed limits here are, it's saying its minimum speed it can go is 0, and its maximum speed is 200 centimeters. Well, you don't want them to be sort of stagnant and stopped, so let's crank the minimum speed it can be. In fact, let's bring this weight all the way up to 100, and then we'll see an actual effect. So let's bring this minimum speed up to 100. Okay, it didn't look like it had too much effect. Let's crank up the max, so it's 1,000. And let's bring the minimum up to about half of that, 500. There we go. So you can actually dictate the sort of... You can actually say, this is the slowest you can ever go, and this is the maximum you can ever go. And obviously they'll sort of bounce around between those two values. So let's bring the max speed down to 600. Okay. So you can see how that's having a little bit of effect on it. Right, so now we get onto targets. So you've got this target field here. It will chase any number of these target positions which are defined by linked target objects. Now, I made the mistake of going, right, it's looking for an object. Let's create a cube. Let's go back to our flock and drag our cube into this field. It won't let me. What the hell? And that's because it's not looking for any object. It's actually looking for a very specific object. So if I go to plugins, Flock Modifier, and go to the flock target, you've got this flock target now. If I go back to our flock and drag our target into the target field and hit play, let's move this target as well, you'll probably see that nothing happens. And that's because the target has a weight. If we go into the flock target, there's actually a weight within that, and that's set to 100% at the moment. We'll come back to that in a minute. If we go to the flock, you know, it's got the flock target in there, but the weight's 0, so it's not actually going to follow that rule at all. And now we've got a percentage, so it's a percentage of how much it will follow that rule. So if I go to 50%, there'll be a 50% strength on these things moving towards this target, which they have done. And now let's give it a bit more time. And as you can see, once they get past the influence of that target, they turn back and try and stick with it. So that's how you can, you know, make them go to a location. If I put them to 100% of that target, they will really strongly try and get there. Okay, well, now this is where I'm going to knock down the time a little bit. Okay, so this is where we go back to our flock target itself. So you can see the weight here. If I turn this to 0, they are no longer bothered by it. If I crank it up to 100, back they come. So you could animate this to actually, you know, have an effect. So they all go away. And then I slowly crank up the value of this, and then they turn around and come back. So you can have multiple targets, and by turning them on and off, you can actually direct these things via a path, which is really, really handy. Now, these voids are being affected from any distance at the moment, and that's what this infinite value means. If I turn off infinite, it means that let's get back to the beginning. It means that, so this is infinite, and if that's off, we've actually got this fall off here, and we can dictate what the radius of that is. So we can actually, and again, that can be animated, its radius. So let's crap out of things. They're not being influenced at all, but as soon as they get within this sphere of influence, they start wanting to travel towards it. And if they're moving too fast, they'll manage to escape. So you can actually break flocks up in this manner. And again, you can animate the radius. So now we have more voids escaping. So here you get some slight attraction, but not much. But yeah, so again, you can control by that. And like I said, you can have multiple flock targets. Okay, let's get back to the flock. Okay, right, so we're still in the control panel, and we've got a repeller. Okay, so it's the same thing, really. If we go to plugins, Flock Modifier, we've got this repeller. We can actually put this in our world scene somewhere, and you'll notice there's no option to have there's really no option to have an infinite shape for the repeller, because then it would be repelled from everywhere. It's just pointless. So obviously it's got a radius, so if we place this somewhere, let's place this somewhere near the mouth of our particle system, you can see exactly what it does. We can see that the weight is massive, and we've got to go back to our flock, and we've actually got to drag this repeller object into this, which this is a really good idea as well, because it means that you can have multiple flock systems only being affected by certain targets, certain repellers. So let's go back to the beginning. You can see they're being repelled round this. They don't want to be there, around this red thing. In fact, if I make that a little bit more extreme, and then go back to the beginning, oh god, they don't want to be there, and they'll fly away from it. They'll get completely repelled, and then they'll go into the influence of this attracting thing. Okay, so that's those two things covered. I'm just going to get rid of in fact, I'm just going to move that out of the way. I wonder what will happen if you've got something, so it's kind of like a wall, like this. Oh, they don't like that. They really don't like that. Okay, cool. Right, let's get back to our flock then. The last thing we want to have a look at is this avoid geometry. So what this basically, well, the clue's in the name. A void will try and avoid colliding or penetrating a geometry. So basically a ray gets cast along the travel direction of each void, and if a ray hits the geometry within this distance value here, if it goes, oh, I've hit something and it's within 50 centimeters, get the hell away. So it avoids geometry by doing that kind of calculation. Okay, so let's give this a go. We need geometry for it to avoid, so let's turn our cube back on. And in fact, I'm not going to do it with the cube. I'm going to do it with the sphere. And just going to move it there like this. And go back to our flock. And then drag this geometry into the geometry field. And oh look, I can't. It won't let me. And that's because this is a primitive. For some reason it doesn't want to work with primitives like spheres and stuff like that. So if I make this editable, and then go back to my flock and then drag it in. Did I make that editable? No, I didn't. There we go. Go back to my flock, grab the sphere, drag it into this field here, go back to the beginning. Now you can see that it's avoiding that geometry and just swooping around it. So obviously if you've got birds or something that you want going around a building or anything like that, you can do that. Now let's have a look at let's crank the timeline down to 5 seconds again, because then we can see it on repeat. So let's crank this distance up. Let's make it 100. You can see that now they're avoiding it, but from much further away. Okay, you can even crank it up more than that if you like. So it implies that they can see it from a distance and they're like, oh, there's an obstacle. And again, we can crank that up again, make it even more obvious. Okay, in this setting here, we got it set to soft. We set it to hard. There's kind of like no blend. There's no blend between them seeing it and going, I better move out the way. It just does it instantly. So it's a lot more of a harsh. It looks a lot harsher. And I personally think that the soft mode actually looks a lot more natural. So you can see that. Yeah, move. Yeah, I definitely like the soft a lot more. Although, obviously with hard, it basically makes this 100%, and then on soft, it's the same because it's 100%, but if we crank this down to maybe 50, there's a bit more of a natural blend in there. There we go. So that's pretty much it for this plugin, guys. I just thought it'd be something useful to show you. As always, check out the Digital Meat website, digitalmeat.uk. You can find me on Facebook and Twitter under Digital Meat 3D. Then you'll get updates about new tutorials and that kind of stuff. Don't forget to donate if you want to support Digital Meat. You can do that on the website, on the About page. Also, there's a merch store as well. So if you want some Digital Meat products like T-shirts, mugs, there's also some other designs as well, just general designs that I've put up. So yeah, show your support. That'd be great. Okay, guys, that's everything. Cheers. Thanks for watching. Bye.